I have to paint the most popular guy on campus. I like him, but he deserves better than me. At that point, I had never actually drawn another person before. Okay, let me rephrase. I had never actually had a person sit in front of me to be drawn by me alone. We had models come in for figure drawing class, sure, and while these could get awkward, they were always naked after all. With so many people around you, you kind of forget the awkwardness and just get into it, you know? That was fine. That I was used to. But I wasn't used to the inherent intimacy that comes with sitting to draw someone privately. And really, it wasn't something I wanted to deal with, but I didn't have a choice. So I like to draw. I like to draw a lot, and I always have. I spent most of my time in high school drawing, and generally showing a huge interest in art. It was my main source of comfort when I got bullied in high school. But more on that later. I was in college then, in my third year studying the fine arts. I make it sound fancier than it actually was. If you ever studied art before, you know a good chunk of it is sleepless nights trying to meet up with an assignment by squeezing out skill that you've never even knew you had. But I was living the dream, even though a lot of times it felt like a dream I didn't deserve. I overworked myself. I didn't have a lot of friends. I had never been a very social person to begin with, but I'm sure even more people avoided me because of how I looked. I always looked exhausted because I was always drawing. I was desperate to prove myself with my art. Because of the way I saw it, it was the only thing I had going for me. At 21, I had no friends despite being bisexual. I had never been with a girl or a guy. Truly, it felt like the understanding I had of my own sexuality was wasted knowledge. I was bullied constantly in my high school years for being different. And while it didn't have any long-term physical effects on me, it had left a very glaring mental mark. I hated myself. I hated myself and I wanted to prove to the world and to myself that I was worth something. So I drew. Project Muse was something every student at Willoughby University knew of, even the students from other majors. Every year, the third years of the Fine Arts Department would be paired up with volunteers from other departments, with that student becoming the muse of the artist. They would spend 2 months with each other, getting to know each other, while the artist was tasked with creating a portrait of their muse that captured their essence accurately. They had 2 months to do this. All the portraits would be displayed and judged in an exhibition, and the winner would get their portrait permanently displayed at the local museum. It always caused quite a stir on campus. Lots of people volunteered, though not everyone was picked. The volunteers would get extra credit, and well, they got to have a portrait of themselves for free. I heard that a lot of close friendships and even romances were formed because of Muse. But that, of course, was not my concern. The idea of something created by me being displayed at a proper museum filled me with excitement. I wanted so badly to win. There were, however, a few problems. The unique thing about Muse was that the judges did not judge simply based on how nice the portrait was. The goal was to capture the essence of your subject, to give the viewer of the piece an immediate idea of the type of person your muse was, and the type of relationship you had cultivated with them. Such a thing would, of course, require me to actually cultivate a relationship with another person. A proper one. A difficult thing for me. Regardless, when I got into my third year, I entered the contest. As I signed up, I spotted a familiar face nearby, one that I avoided as much as I could. But he was walking up to me before I had even finished putting my name down on the paper. Evan? Adrian didn't even bother trying to hide the disbelief in his voice. He laughed. You're entering Muse? His voice had grown deeper since high school, but it had not lost the mocking tone. It was ever present, just like the smug look on his face. What else would I be doing here? I mumbled, irritated. Adrian snorted. Oh, my bad, man. I just wanted to make sure that I was seeing right. You do know what Muse is about, right? He tilted his head at me. You know it's not just drawing, yeah? You have to actually talk to people, you know? Pursing my lips, I wrote down the last letter of my name and shot him a glare through the corner of my eye. This only made him smirk. Ooh, scary, he barked out a laugh and stepped back. All right, I'll leave you to it. It's good that you're stepping out of your comfort zone, yeah? He faked a sweet smile. Just don't overdo it, okay? You're going to lose anyway, so it doesn't matter. Plus, you look terrible. With that, Adrian turned around and swaggered away. I watched his back, scowling. There seems to be a common belief that high school bullies mature as they get older, and that they grow out of their unsavory habits and become nice, well-adjusted adults. I can say from experience that this is not true. Their methods of bullying may mature, yes, but they will still get the same pleasure from getting under other people's skin. With Adrian, the only difference was between him in college and him when he had bullied me in high school was the fact that in college, his tormenting grew a lot more mental in nature. He knew how crap my self-esteem was. partially because he was a major reason it was so low in the first place, and had a blast getting under my skin. I hated him. I wanted to beat him. I wanted to win Muse. But as the Muse assignments were announced a week later, I ran into another much bigger problem. A small cluster of students stood in front of the class, all from majoring in different things. Out of all of them, I recognized a few, but there was only one person there I knew by name. Jordan was the shining star of our year, golden-haired and dreamy. He was the object of affection and admiration for many, many people. It was no surprise he had gotten selected as Muse. His essence was so dazzling that it would be a waste for someone not to put on a canvas. I stared at him as he talked with the other people around him. He made it look so effortless. I couldn't help but wonder how he did it. The entire room fell silent as the professor arrived and began to read out the assignments. And to my shock, Jordan was my Muse. When they called our names together, his eyes roved around the room. He met my eyes and smiled at me. I sank down into my seat. Quickly, this had become the absolute worst-case scenario. After the announcements were over, the crowd dispersed as everyone went to find their partners. I took a deep breath and got up to walk over to Jordan. "Hey there," he smiled at me, and I nearly visibly cringed at how he practically radiated confidence. I glanced around for a moment. I couldn't meet his eyes just yet, and was surprised to see quite a few people glancing our way. Apparently, quite a few people were interested in seeing who would be making a portrait of him. "Hi," I finally breathed out. "I'm Evan. Nice to meet you, Evan. Really looking forward to working with you." Still smiling, he shot a hand for me to shake. I reached out to shake it gingerly. He was excited. What expectations did he have of this experience? Was he expecting us to become friends, or was he expecting a fantastic portrait of himself? Ideally, the time we spent together was supposed to produce both outcomes. But at that point, I was starting to wonder if I was capable of either of those things. We started by exchanging contact information there. As we did, I spotted Adrian with his Muse. I knew her, not quite by name, but she was some kind of influencer. Her videos even popped up on my social media feeds occasionally, much to my bafflement. They were chatting up a storm, already seeming to have a good rapport. This, of course, did not bode well, but I couldn't do anything about that. All I could do was try my best with what I'd been given. Days later. "So how long have you been drawing?" Jordan asked me. I looked up from my sketchbook. "What?" I asked. "How long have you been drawing?" he asked again, smiling. It was our first meetup. I decided to meet him at his apartment off campus. I figured it would give me a better idea of the kind of person he was. So far, all I had gotten was that he was much neater than I had expected him to be, and did he like 21 Pilots, based on the poster hanging over his bed. He was trying to make conversation. Well, of course he was, but it still caught me by surprise. On my page, there were a number of failed sketches of him. I looked back down, my pencil idly scribbling on the page. Since I could hold a pencil, I guess. "Really? That's awesome. I've always wanted to get into art, but I'm already in my 20s. Always feels like it's too late for me to pick up an entirely new hobby, you know?" Jordan said. "Yeah." I turned to a fresh page to try drawing him again. When I looked up at him again, he was watching me with an expression that was a mix of puzzlement and clear frustration. He'd been trying to strike a conversation with me for about 30 minutes. At that point, I responded as best as I could, but it seemed like my answers weren't satisfactory. In truth, I just wanted to succeed at putting his likeness down on paper to start with. But as we continued to meet, it became clear that he genuinely wanted to become friends, and when I didn't reciprocate, things started to go sour. He didn't express his growing dislike for me explicitly, but I could tell that he was starting to wish he had gotten assigned to someone else. That feeling, at least, was somewhat mutual. I was in truth kind of jealous of him. It must be nice, I thought, to be able to make friends with people so easily, and to not have people see you as weird or unsettling. To my dismay, Adrian seemed to be having a much better time with his Muse. I spotted them once in the campus lawn, laughing as Adrian sketched her. I sighed to myself as I walked past them, frustrated. Maybe I shouldn't have entered at all in the first place. One day, we decided to change the scenery might be different. As uncomfortable as I was with his attempts at social interaction, I knew that a decent relationship with him would boost my chances of winning, at least a little bit. So when he suggested that we have to go out to a bar one evening, I agreed. Against all common sense. At first, it went just about as well as I had suspected it would. Horribly. The place was small and not very crowded, which I appreciated, but I soon found out the music playing and the chatter around us to be overwhelming. To make things worse, Jordan kept trying to talk to me the entire time. "I actually found this place sometime in my first year," he was saying, drink in hand. "I'm surprised it hasn't gotten super popular yet." "Not complaining though. I'd lose my mind if this place suddenly got super packed," he laughed. "Right. I mumbled in response. I was nursing a cup of water. You don't talk a lot, Evan, Jordan said suddenly, his tone pointed. Like, there's shy and then there's you. Is there a reason for that or something? The alcohol had made him more loose-lipped. He'd probably had that question on his mind for a while at that point. I sucked in a sharp breath. I'm going to use the bathroom. I pushed my chair back and stood up. He stared at me in surprise as I turned around and headed to the restroom. While there, I splashed some water on my face and tried to calm down. I reminded myself why I was putting up with this, and I stepped back outside. I went to step back outside, but I stopped by the door as soon as I saw that someone had taken my spot beside Jordan and was now trying to talk. She was very drunk and she was very clearly trying to come onto him. And Jordan, to my surprise, looked very uncomfortable. Part of me wanted to just wait it out in the bathroom until she left, but I realized she might not leave. After all, despite the fact that Jordan looked like he wanted her too, she was so wasted that she couldn't see it. Or she didn't care. Maybe she would leave if I returned. With a sigh, I walked back to our table. The girl stopped her animated talking and turned to face me, looking confused. Oh, hi, she said. Jordan turned to me as well, and the look of relief on his face was so obvious, it was almost funny. Evan, hey, you're back, he stood. What took you so long? I don't think I was in there for too long. I just needed to clear my head a bit. I responded. Jordan nodded, like my words were the most important thing in the world. Who's this? She asked Jordan, still staring at me. We came here together, clarified, but that just made her look even more confused. Oh, are you guys together? She asked slowly. Jordan and I exchanged a look. Or are you just friends? She added in clarification. Something told me she was going to base her next actions off the answer to this question. Well, yes, we are together. I made my decision in a split second, taking a step closer to Jordan and looping my arm around his waist. Is there a problem? I felt him tense slightly at my touch, likely from surprise. But by the time I looked up at his face, he was smiling. Great, I thought. He's playing along. The girl looked shocked and then slightly embarrassed. Is there a problem? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Dumbfounded, she took her head and stood up and walked away. It was only after she was out of sight that I let go of Jordan. When I looked at him, he was staring at me, trying not to laugh. Well, that was a way to get rid of her, he chuckled. I shrugged. She looked stubborn. She might have stayed if I hadn't told her that, I responded plainly. I was mostly just happy I hadn't grossed Jordan out, but one look at his face told me I'd done the exact opposite. He looked oddly impressed. We both agreed that leaving at that moment would be the best thing to do. While we had grown tired of the bar, though, he wasn't ready to go home just yet. We ended the night with him driving me around town, showing me all of his favorite spots that I probably didn't know about. It almost exhausted me, until I realized that this was his way of thanking me for helping him out back at the bar. And despite everything, the day ended rather pleasantly. Weeks later. Following that night, talking to Jordan became easier. I guess seeing him in an uncomfortable situation like that knocked him down a few pegs in my head. At the same time, it seemed to have raised his opinion of me just a bit higher. 2 weeks passed. I started to see why he was so popular in the first place, sure. He was good-looking and cheerful, but these things weren't just superficial. He was genuinely a nice guy. You sure you got enough sleep? He asked me one afternoon. We had just finished our afternoon classes and were meeting up to get lunch together. This, at some point, had become the normal order of things. Sleep? I echoed, puzzled. What makes you think I'm not sleeping enough? Jordan was quiet. When I looked up at him, there was a slight exasperated smile on his face. Without another word, he took a hold of my arm and pulled me aside. I followed him, confused, and suddenly we were in one of the bathrooms, alone in front of the sinks. He hooked a finger in the collar of my shirt and tugged in forward. I was confused until I looked down and saw a tag on my shirt. It was on backwards. I blushed. You didn't notice? He laughed and let go of me as I hurriedly shrugged my shirt off and started to turn it inside out. The huge picture has been on your back all day, dude. Point taken. I huffed out, putting my shirt on the right way. But I can't exactly get a lot of sleep. Assignments and stuff. It's not me, is it? He put a hand on his chest, brows furrowed in faux concern. Am I really that hard to draw? Is my essence that difficult to capture? I rolled my eyes. With you, all I have to do is draw a massive smiley face. There isn't anything complicated about your essence. Jordan laughed again, before assuming a more serious expression. Okay, but really, get more sleep. You always look exhausted, and it doesn't look healthy. I sighed. Yeah. It wasn't the first time someone had told me I needed to get more sleep, but no one had expressed that kind of concern for me in a while. That night, I found myself slipping into bed just a little bit earlier than I usually would. Drawing Jordan got easier. I still wasn't close to creating the portrait, but I had studied him so much that I could draw him from memory at a point. I remembered the little details about him, the light dusting of freckles on his nose, the slight crookedness of one of his front teeth. I'd make my pencil strokes lighter when drawing his lashes. They were long and slightly curled, but so fair that you couldn't even see them a lot of the times unless you got close enough to him. I started to enjoy those moments when we would just sit together and I would draw him. He stopped talking so much during those moments. I think he realized I focus a lot better in complete silence. He broke the silence one evening to make an observation. "You look so focused," he grinned. "Are you really analyzing everything about my face?" I shrugged. "Kind of. It's best to focus on the whole and not the little details, though. At least when you're just starting on a piece," I responded. Deciding to take a break, I set down my sketchbook and flexed my fingers. Curiously, Jordan reached out to grab it. He flipped through it. "Wait, I didn't pose for these." He looked up at me with wide eyes. "Evan, can you draw me from memory now?" I blinked. I guess so," I mumbled. "It's kind of muscle memory now, I guess." Jordan smiled so hard that I was sure his face hurt. He looked back down at my sketchbook, looking almost giddy. "That's awesome," he breathed out. "These are so good, Evan. The fact that this is how you see me, even when I'm not there with you, is so cool." He sounded so genuine that it made my cheeks flush. I had received compliments on my art before, of course, but none of them had made me feel the way Jordan's words then made me feel. That moment seared itself in my brain. Him bent over my sketchbook, flipping through the pages with boyish excitement on his face. And when I was alone, I found myself drawing him in this moment over and over again. It was the closest I had come to really capturing that pure essence of his. And it was when I had drawn him like that dozens of times that I realized I was starting to like him. I already did like. The realization startled me. I had never had a crush on the traditional sense. I only knew my sexuality from the basic physical attractions I had experienced growing up, but I'd never fallen in love before. The realization unsettled me, and what unsettled me even more was the fact that my feelings seemed to be reciprocated. At least a little bit. Jordan invited me out more often. Sometimes I went, but sometimes I didn't feel up for it. When he understood that being in public overwhelmed me at times, he started paying me more visits. He would text me more frequently, telling me good morning, checking in on me, sending me funny pictures and videos he had seen online. I would step out of my classroom and he would be waiting nearby for me. He liked me back, or at least he enjoyed my company so much that he was actively seeking it out above everything else. Knowing that made me so happy and also filled me with dread. Jordan was so handsome and so popular. I was sure that he had tons of options, so why me? Maybe he was just endeared by my art, but there was no way he could actually like me. He could do much, much better. I had issues. My art was literally the only thing I had going for me. I would get so guilty whenever he showed me affection because it felt like I had used my skill to trick him into thinking I was actually an interesting person. So I tried to distance myself from him. Maybe if I did that, he would realize his mistake, and perhaps we could stay friends. But he had to realize he could do much better than me. Did I do something wrong? The question came suddenly. He had asked me if I wanted to go get lunch, like we usually did, and I had turned him down for the third time in a row. I played dumb. "No," I said. "What do you mean? You don't want to hang out anymore, is all?" He frowned. "I'm just a little confused." He looked confused. I felt bad. I felt even worse that someone like him was hanging on to my words, asking if he had somehow managed to offend me. "Well," I took a deep breath. "Sometimes I just need a little space is all. The project is fun, but it doesn't mean I always want to hang out with you, you know?" From the look on Jordan's face, I might as well have stabbed him in the chest. "The project?" He blinked rapidly. "I mean, I guess so, but I thought... Is that the only reason you hang out with me?" His voice sounded so small. I felt my heart twist in my chest. Everything in me wanted to stop, but I didn't. The guilt was driving me crazy. Jordan deserved better than to be hung up over someone like me. "Why else would I?" I said. "We don't exactly have a lot in common." Jordan's brows shut up in surprise, and then they settled down as he scowled. "Oh, really?" The hurt in his voice surprised me. "If that's how you feel, then let's just forget about the project, yeah? I hate to make you feel like you're stuck with me." "Wait, no," I found myself saying. "That's not what I... Forget it. Just forget it." Suddenly, He was stepping away and I was regretting my words. Deeply. He turned and walked away, and I wanted to tell him to come back, but what could I say after hurting his feelings so deeply? I ended up losing a friend, and a muse, and there were only a couple of days left before the exhibition. I had already started on the big portrait, but I couldn't exactly finish it and turn it in without my muse. I messed up. 2 days later. Several times I thought of calling him to apologize, but I would remember his hurt expression and decide against it. What could I possibly say that would make everything okay? But it wasn't until he was gone that I realized how much I let him into my heart. It was when I found myself in bed by 10 p.m., something that had been completely alien to me at some point, sleeping at such a reasonable time, that I realized how much I wanted him in my life. I sat up inside, holding my head in my hands. There was nothing I could do about it. Nothing I could do that would make it okay. But there was no way I would know if I didn't try. I knew there was a big party on campus that night, and I knew it was the kind of party Jordan liked to attend. The party was open to everyone, so I would be able to go, but would I find him there? And more importantly, how the heck would I cope with being in a room with that many people? I felt the fear start to settle in, but the desire to make up with Jordan came in much, much stronger. Suddenly, I was on my feet and pulling on a hoodie. Suddenly, I was leaving my room and finding the address on the school's social media. Suddenly, I was in a house full of drunk people. The air was hot, the music was loud, and I quickly felt very, very dizzy. I tried to find Jordan in the crowd, but I couldn't spot him at all in the crowd. Maybe he hadn't even come at all. The crowd pushed me around like I was a beach ball in the sea. I bumped into one person and then two. And then I bumped into a third person and I heard an exclamation. "What the hell?" a guy yelled. I turned to him and saw that I had accidentally made him spill his drink all over himself. He was already drunk, it seemed, and this just made him angry. He turned to me and grabbed a fistful of my shirt. "Are you blind, man?" he barked. "Watch where you're going." I was stammering out apologies, terrified. He really looked like he might hit me. But then someone from the crowd reached out and grabbed my arm, pulling me away. They pulled me out of the crowd and into the backyard, which was significantly more quiet than the inside of the house. And suddenly I was face to face with Jordan. "What?" he hissed. "Are you doing here?" I was so relieved to see him that I forgot he was angry at me. I came to see you," I panted out. He frowned. "Why?" As if he suddenly remembered that he was supposed to be angry at me. He let go, stepping back. "I thought you didn't want to hang out with me." I swallowed. "That's not true," I confessed. "I want to hang out with you. I want to hang out with you a lot, but you felt the same way." He frowned. "Of course I did. Why wouldn't I?" he asked. I'm me. I'm pretty weird. I've got a lot of issues. I don't even like myself most times." The self-depreciating words spilled out of my mouth before I could even stop them. I thought you could do better than wanting to hang out with someone like me. I flushed, embarrassed to have let something like that slip. Jordan's expression softened before he breathed out a laugh. "Was it really that obvious?" he asked. "A little," I responded honestly, looking away. "I'm sorry, really. I just thought it would be better if you..." I couldn't finish my thought. Jordan set a finger under my chin and guided my face back upwards, and then he leaned down and kissed me. I tensed, surprised, but I quickly melted. I had never been kissed before. I had never been wanted before. It felt so achingly good. I couldn't get enough of it. "I think you're great," Jordan mumbled against my lips. "I promise." "Thanks," I mumbled back, shutting my eyes. I think you're really great, too." He kissed me again, and then the noise and music coming from inside seemed to have completely melted away. There was nothing else but Jordan and his love. Days later, with only 3 days left before the exhibition, Jordan and I spent a lot of time together, trying to finish up the portrait. He would strike different poses, and I kept starting over and over again. No wonder they gave us a whole 2 months. He complained tiredly the first night. I groaned in response, but I remembered that moment, the moment I had fallen for him, or at least the moment I had realized it. Him flipping through my sketchbook that at that point had been full of art of him. That memory was burned into my mind after all, and while he slept over, I pulled out a canvas, some charcoal, and got to work. It was messy and it was rushed, but I poured as much into that portrait as I could. Compared to the other portraits on display that day, it was obvious that mine had been super rushed, especially when you compared it to something like Adrian's painting, fully rendered and clearly something that had taken a lot of time. He had looked so sure of his win. Frankly, I had been sure of him winning too. So you can only imagine my surprise, and his, when my portrait won instead. Out of all of them, it was the only one that gave the viewer an immediate impression of the type of person Jordan was, and how I, the creator, felt about him. It was a piece dripping with fondness, apparently. Frankly, I didn't believe it until Jordan and I were standing side by side, staring at my art on the wall of the museum. I can't believe I'm in a freaking museum. Jordan laughed. This is awesome. I was quiet. The reality of it had finally started to settle in, but a part of me was still in disbelief. He reached down, grabbing my hand and giving it a gentle squeeze. You deserve the win, though, he said softly. And I'm not just saying that as your muse. I've never seen myself look so beautiful before. I turned to him then, shaking my head playfully. I already told you, that's just how you look. Beautiful. He looked at me and beamed, and I knew at that moment that I would be drawing Jordan many, many times from that point going forward. Following that day, we started dating officially. It was new and strange in a lot of ways. I had never had anyone that close to me before, both physically and emotionally, so it took a lot of getting used to. Not that I minded. Thankfully, we did not live far from each other, so he was able to come visit me at my new apartment when the semester ended. Welcome to my very, very humble abode, I told him as I let him in. It's pretty dusty. I haven't had much time to clean up yet. That's fine, Jordan said casually, stepping into the doorway. I can help out if you need it. The summer was one of the sweetest I had ever experienced in my life. When Jordan wasn't at my place, I was at his. He lived deeper in the city, unsurprisingly, so we went on dates a lot to his favorite spots. And I showed him some of my favorite spots for a change. My favorite by far was an art shop close to where I lived. It was small but full of things I found useful. Jordan and I went there that afternoon to shop for him, because he wanted to start working on his art. So it's not too late for me? He asked the cashier, who had been staring at him in awe after I told her he was my boyfriend. She knew me and my personality, so she was probably surprised I had ended up with someone so different. You can start whenever you want. There isn't a time limit, she explained. You'll suck at it for a while, though. That's fine, Jordan responded. I've got a brilliant artist to teach me. Behind him, I smiled sheepishly, and I did teach him. He was an absolute beginner, but he certainly wasn't bad for one. His drawings of me were amateurish, sure, but they were so cute. I ended up framing a few of them, much to his embarrassment. Do my eyes really look like that? I asked, staring at one of my portraits made by him. When he didn't answer, I tried to copy the expression on the portrait. Like this? The right one big and the left one small. Oh, go to hell, he rolled his eyes with a small embarrassed laugh. It was a comfortable day that day, and I had just passed his latest portrait of me on the wall, right next to my bed. I wanted a good laugh each morning, after all. I told him the same in relation. He pinched me, hard. Ow, I cried out, and then wrestled him on the bed. Eventually, I ended up on his lap. You're a menace. Am I now? He asked, and stretched out a hand towards the table to grab a little notebook. He grabbed a small piece of paper again and slapped it in my hand. What are you gonna do about that, baby? Another, I laughed out loud at it. But this one's decent. Immediately, his expression changed. Really? Yeah, I replied and leaned down to press a kiss on his mouth. It's nice. You're nice. No, I replied and shook my head. You're nice. Conclusion. We returned for our fourth and final year after summer. It was exhausting and stressful in a lot of ways, of course, but having Jordan with me made it much, much better. After we graduated, I started to take commissions for my art, and Jordan got a job as a web developer. With our combined income, we were able to find an apartment, and we moved in together. Soon, I would have more pieces of my art displayed in museums. Soon, he would start up a successful social media site. But at that point, as we were moving our boxes up into our little 3-bedroom, all we knew was that was the beginning of the rest of our lives together. The end. Have you ever been drawn or painted before? What was it like? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our rainbow force and stay wholesome.